I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
Yay Networks.
There are times when a product that is marketed, it's hyped as being really good for us, we just want to believe it. We want to believe it. We want to believe that this product that tastes, looks, feels exactly like the quote real thing, but has these other elements that we're being told are better for us. We want to believe it. And this isn't about knocking all those things down. It's about taking a deeper look at headlines that are hyping it up, at marketing, at the websites, at social media that are really hyping up some of these products as better for us, and going that level below, taking a closer look and seeing what's really underneath. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, we're talking about one of my favorite things, also one of the most frustrating topics for me, and that is misleading headlines, misleading marketing, and specifically about products that maybe one element of it could be good for us, and that is just really blown up in the marketing and the headlines. I've got 3 that I'm going to talk through specifically today, and all of this is just kind of just to keep our eyes open, our eyes, our ears, and not to fall prey to these tactics. And so we're not saying that everything about these products that we're about to talk about is terrible, but they are really just not everything that they are built up, that they're everything that they're hyped up to be. Each of these 3 products are products that have been covered in the media, and I have had many, many people forwarding me these when they're covered. Hey, did you see this? What do you think about this product? Like, this looks amazing. And that's where the frustration part comes in for me. And so that's why we're covering these things. I will also say that each of these 3 products is local. They're all based here, we'll say loosely, in the South Louisiana area. I'm not going to name them by brand. I don't want to be negative about a specific brand or company. They likely have the best intentions here, but I want to use these as examples of marketing and helping us to see, here's what the claim is, but let's take a closer look and see what's really happening underneath. We're going to be talking about a specialty rice option. We're going to be talking about a Bloody Mary mix, and we're going to be talking about a cocktail alternative. So starting with this specialty rice, this is the one that I probably got the most enthusiastic forwards or shares of media coverage that people saw about this. And this is a rice that is marketed. The headlines basically say this high protein, diabetic friendly rice is booming, and talking about that it is just taking off, that this is, people are just so excited. The company just can't keep up with the production of it. And the way that it's marketed, the way that the company's website refers to it is higher protein, low glycemic index, tastes amazing. This is a perfect example that the company's not lying. This rice is technically higher protein. It is lower glycemic index. That still doesn't make it really what we would consider high protein or what we would consider healthy or nutritious. It's still a white rice. So when we look at the claim, let's start with the claim about protein. 53% more protein is what it says. What does that mean? When we look at a serving of this rice, it's 5 grams of protein. To put that into perspective, an egg has 7 grams of protein. A piece of chicken, let's say a chicken breast or a piece of fish, the size of a deck of cards, just 3 ounces, a pretty small amount, is going to have about 20 grams of protein. Something like a petite filet would easily have 50 grams of protein. A scoop of most protein powders, 20 grams of protein. A carton of Fage Greek yogurt, 2% Greek yogurt, 20 grams of protein. So when we look at a serving of this rice, having 5 grams of protein, that's less than what you get in a single egg. It is far from high protein. Now, the claims on it or the marketing on it will say 53% more protein, or it'll say higher protein. So again, they're not lying, but it's kind of guiding us to think like, what do we think when we see this? And what are people saying to me? Molly, have you seen that high protein rice out there? So what does regular rice has? The same size serving, if we compare gram for gram, ounce for ounce, the same size serving of regular rice has 3.25 grams of protein. So the bump that we're looking at is about 3.25 grams of protein to 5 grams of protein. That egg has 7. That carton of Greek yogurt has 20, on and on. So when we look at this and this kind of being one of the big eye catchers, the big headline about this is, wow, it has more protein than other rice varieties. This gets us jazzed up. It gets people really excited about it. It's also marketed as low glycemic, which is true. Now, here's how glycemic index works. The way that glycemic index is tested, which by the way, I wanted to have this product tested because as I can tell, there's only one test that reveals a glycemic index of about 41. Typical rice has a glycemic index, white rice has a glycemic index of about 70. I would love to have it tested independently, but to have glycemic index tested from the companies I've reached out to, it's thousands of dollars. In most cases, $10,000. So not something that's easy to get it tested, kind of to do a third party check. So if anybody's listening and you have access to that and you're like, hey, I'd like to try this out with you, let me know. We will ship some over there and get this independently tested. But let's just say for sake of conversation, we're relying on the one result that the company has and a glycemic index of 41. That's a lot lower than a glycemic index of 70 for typical white rice, 60 to 70 for typical white rice. But here's how glycemic index works. You look at how much carbohydrate, basically it's based on a standard of about 50 grams of carbohydrate. And how does 50 grams of carbohydrate affect blood sugar and insulin levels, glucose levels? What slows down digestion of carbohydrates? Protein, fat, fiber. So that little bit of extra protein, in theory, could lower that glycemic index. I would be really surprised if bumping it from 3.25 grams of protein to 5 had that much of an influence. Now, there are also resistant starches, and that's starches that break down slower in our bloodstream. So it's possible that something like that has been introduced into this rice. This is me hypothesizing. I haven't seen this. And so, it's possible that it's a lower glycemic index, but the end result is the same amount of carbohydrate, cup for cup or ounce for ounce, as typical white rice. Because it's still white rice, there's 0 fiber in it. There's, that smidge more protein. And so we're still looking at, y'all, this is white rice with just a smidge more protein is essentially what it is. And again, what the company says is that glycemic index that's lower. That's fine. But, you get the same thing anytime you have any type of a whole grain starch or fruit, or, if you had any carbohydrate, once you introduce fiber into that, once you introduce protein, or once you pair those starchy carbohydrates with that source of protein or fiber or fat, all of those things lower the glycemic index. So when we're looking at glycemic index, it also indicates it's based on basically if you were to consume that food in a vacuum. So if something is consumed on its own solo, that glycemic index reads true. But as soon as you put that rice with anything, let's say salmon, that's going to give us protein, it's going to give us plant, the fish oils. We're going to add some plant-based fiber with, like, let's say broccoli or wilted spinach. We're introducing the protein, the fats, the fiber with that rice. You're immediately lowering the glycemic index anyway. So glycemic ranking can be a useful tool, but realize it's only when that food is consumed in a vacuum on its own, isolated with no other foods. As soon as we introduce any other foods with this that add oils of any type, fats of any type, protein, fiber, already we're lowering the glycemic index. So for me, seeing a rice that claims a lower glycemic index and a smidge more protein, it's just not worth it to me. It's still white rice. However, as we mentioned, it is just taking off. And the company, they credit word of mouth being a reason. As I said, people are they're talking about it. They're excited that there's potentially this high protein white rice out there that's actually good for you. Social media, of course, and then partnering with grocery stores, getting it into grocery stores. And there's a local grocery chain, here in South Louisiana that has what they have branded as their kind of healthy eating program inside of their grocery store. And the owner of the grocery store, said, wow, this rice is a great addition to our healthy eating program. It makes it easier to choose items in the grocery store that are healthier for you. So not only is the brand, has their impact on social media, aligning with grocery stores that are continuing to give that messaging that, while it's not a fib, those things that we just talked about, is it higher protein? Yeah. Is it maybe that 53% more protein? Yeah. But that's still not significant for us to think that this is nutritious. One of the things that I thought was interesting is, one of the quotes that I saw from the grocery chain, the owner said, our customers are always watching their carb intake and they're always looking for more options. Well, the carbs are the same, but who's really going to go look and compare label to label of this product and traditional white rice? So lesson learned here, when we're seeing something like this, take a look, go a little bit deeper. What's actually in the product? What is that label saying? What's in regular white rice? How significant of a difference is this really? If you're like, I don't even know where I would start to look for those things, send it to somebody that you trust. Send it to me, send it to a dietitian in your life and say, hey, what's your true opinion on these things? And I would encourage you though, just putting those items side by side and just taking a look and getting past those marketing claims. So that's the first one, this specialty rice with the higher protein claims. Let's take a minute to talk about the Farmer's Dog, partner for this week's episode. It has us rethinking how we feed our dogs with real, fresh food. Y'all, this is a cool brand. I don't have a dog, so we actually tried out Farmer's Dog with Ella Sue, my sister-in-law Tracy's golden retriever. You've heard me talking about her before on this podcast. She is the pup who actually lost about 20 pounds with intermittent fasting she needed to lose the weight per guidance by her vet. She has bad joints, genetically bad joints. And carrying around the 20 extra pounds was just not good. So she's kept it off with intermittent fasting, but food is a thing. She just can't get enough. And she loves the Farmer's Dog meals. I shared photos of her on my Instagram account, Molly Kimball RD. Y'all can check them out there. The Farmer's Dog is real, fresh, healthy food for your dog. It's whole meats, vegetables that are gently steamed in human-grade kitchens to preserve their nutritional value. Her blends also included fish oil, vitamins, minerals. Just tell the Farmer's Dog about your dog, and they'll deliver a personalized, vet-developed meal plan for as little as $3 a day. The meals arrive in these pre-portioned, ready-to-serve packs, and they're delivered on your schedule so that you'll never run out. Get 50% off your first box of fresh, healthy food at thefarmersdog.com/fueled. Plus, you'll get free shipping. Just go to thefarmersdog.com/fueled to get 50% off. That's thefarmersdog.com/fueled. The next one, this is a product that I truly believe the people developing it just truly have only good intentions here. I think maybe it was more the headline that was the issue that really kind of caught my attention. And again, a lot of people forwarded it to me. The headline for this one said, looking for a salt-free Bloody Mary. And then it talks about how, this local company, very small company, created a salt-free Bloody Mary mix. So what's interesting on this is they have a line of seasonings, a full line of seasonings that are salt-free. Again, I really think that this brand truly has the best intentions. So they had their Bloody Mary seasoning mix, and then they added the extra ingredients. So things like celery seed and orange and lemon and paprika. And then instead of like Worcestershire sauce that would be high in sodium, they had a powdered version of it. So those things that they created to kind of make this Bloody Mary mix. And so you add a teaspoon of that, which is great. What I guess I found it also entertaining as more this one more entertaining than frustrating, I would say, because that's all great. Then in the example that is covered in the article about it, they show, okay, like, hey, this is how easy it is. We have just a teaspoon of our mix, and then we put it into a glass filled with tomato juice. So here's, I guess, why the headline got to me. A cup of tomato juice has almost 700 milligrams of sodium. And that's just how tomato juice is. And so when you look at just the, really simple ingredient list, it's basically tomato juice, usually from concentrate, salt, maybe some vitamin C in there. So that cup of tomato juice packing in almost 700 milligrams of sodium, the headline telling us, are you looking for a salt-free Bloody Mary? It's really not a salt-free Bloody Mary. It's the salt-free seasoning and the salt-free mix. But as soon as you're putting into just traditional tomato juice, you've got almost 700 milligrams of sodium. And just kind of put that in perspective, someone who has hypertension, they're really trying to watch their blood pressure. Also people who are older, or have other risk factors, the recommendation is typically to keep your sodium intake under 1,500 milligrams a day. So nearly 700 in a cup of tomato juice, that's striking. The recommendation for just an otherwise healthy person is around 2,300 milligrams. Now, if someone sweats a lot, they're exercising, they work outside, and they don't have other reasons to limit their sodium, many people can still have more and still be very healthy. Also, if they're sweating and they're losing a lot of that salt through sweat. So, but 1,500 to 2,300 is really kind of the typical recommended upper limits. So 700 is a pretty good chunk toward that. What I also thought was entertaining in the article, so again, the headline, are you looking for a salt-free Bloody Mary? Like, here's your solution. And then they describe, okay, so they've got their seasoning mix, they put it in tomato juice, with over ice. And then they garnish it with olives, which are really high sodium, smoked sausage, and pickled okra. So I was like, there's nothing. This is not a salt-free Bloody Mary. So again, I think this brand has really good intentions. It also talked about kind of the reasoning behind why they have this low sodium seasoning line. And it was personal health issues on their part, specifically heart issues. And that was really the catalyst for them to change their diet. And part of that was, okay, how can we find some of our favorite foods and how can we season our favorite foods the traditional way that we want to, but with salt-free alternatives for that. And so, as I said, I think that this is a brand that really has a good intent. But then when you look at the reality of, we're still not having a salt-free Bloody Mary. The headlines are still really kind of misleading on here, or really just not accurate. And so looking to see, okay, well, maybe I could still do a lower sodium one, and maybe I could do low sodium tomato juice, which can be a significant switch. We can also do that with other, essentially the mix and the seasoning that goes into a Bloody Mary. That's, relatively easy to have some of those seasonings and those flavors that don't have a lot of sodium. The biggest culprit really in a Bloody Mary is the tomato juice. So if you're switching to lower sodium tomato juice, regardless of what mix or other seasonings you're using, you're already going to be a bunch of steps ahead. So like I said, this one was one that was probably less frustrating to me as the brand goes, and probably a little bit more just like maybe a little bit of about the headline, just managing people's expectations that maybe it's not fully a salt-free Bloody Mary. It could still be loaded with sodium, but I do appreciate this small business really opening up the conversation about lower sodium seasonings. So this is one where, again, the brand probably, the product itself can be great. The way that the media is sort of taking it and portraying it and building it to be maybe hyping up one aspect of it that's really fantastic, but then extrapolating that across the whole product and it's not so much. So again, before we get just like so fired up that, oh my gosh, my, grandmother loves Bloody Marys and she never has them anymore because she's got high blood pressure. Well, now we can make them with this seasoning mix or this Bloody Mary mix. Not so quickly. We still need to kind of look at the big picture of this. So a third one here locally, this is one that I'm happy to see that this product is out there. Again, in all three of these, I'm not going to share the name because it really doesn't matter. It's more about kind of just like getting our, shifting our thoughts a little bit to, instead of getting that immediate buy-in when we see that headline, when we see the marketing, when we see what's coming across our social media, we visit a website and we see what's the header across the top, encouraging us all to just go a step or two beyond that to see what do the ingredients say, what does the nutrition fact label say, and if that looks great, well, okay, even though it might look okay, how does that compare to like maybe what the standard was? And then we can kind of see, is this really that much better? So the last one I'm going to talk about, this is a alcohol-free drink, and typically with our Eat Fit initiative, we call them zero proof cocktails. That's sort of what we prefer versus mocktails. And so we have our zero proof cocktail book that's all very low sugar. And the idea is, we love the encouragement and the movement of normalizing drinks that don't contain alcohol, so you don't have to be that person. On a side note, I was actually at an event this past weekend, and they had before the dinner, they had a big cocktail event, and there was, several different bar stations set up and, a whole bunch of cocktails coming out of them, a bunch of different beers and a bunch of different craft beers kind of all lined up on the bar, kind of like right there where you're standing to place your order, and you can kind of look and see what options you want. And I noticed that they had Heineken, and Heineken has 0.0, which means it's a zero proof, zero alcohol. And the labeling on the Heineken has been done really well. It doesn't look like anything different. It doesn't look like you're walking around with like maybe an O'Doul's or something like that. So as I'm standing there, and I had been drinking just club soda at this event, I had noticed several people had Heinekens, maybe in koozies, and I didn't even really think of it. And then as I'm there, I realized, wait a second, that Heineken can of beer is actually Heineken 0.0. And I mentioned it to someone, and they said, oh, wow, I had no idea. They had been drinking Heineken, thought they were drinking Heineken the whole night. They were actually drinking Heineken 0.0. So I really liked that this venue had that as an option. It looked so similar that it really, people didn't even, and it tastes very similar. It's also low sugar. So people didn't even think that they were doing anything different. And if they had that Heineken in their hand, it didn't say like non-alcoholic really big across the front of it. It looks like a very familiar Heineken to people. And so it's a way to just kind of like have something that looks very similar, but is still very low in sugar and a no alcohol version. So I loved that. Similar story. I'm digressing, y'all. But Jazz Fest this year, I was in our Eat Fit team has our annual Alcohol Free for 40 group, and we have an Alcohol Free for 40 Facebook group, which is active year round, but especially active right in the time that we're doing the Alcohol Free for 40 challenge, which is right after Mardi Gras. So it just wrapped up about a month ago. Well, someone posted in our Alcohol Free for 40 Facebook group, and I was really grateful for this. They posted, because I hadn't noticed it, that Jazz Fest had the non-alcoholic, basically the zero proof, non-alcoholic beer called Coors Edge. And I had been there on the first Friday of Jazz Fest. I hadn't even gone to look at the beer tent because I didn't realize it was there. I hadn't seen anything about it. And I actually just didn't even think that they would have something. So when I saw someone had posted that in our Alcohol Free for 40 Facebook group, when I went back with my husband, it was the second Saturday of Jazz Fest. And for those of y'all who aren't local or haven't been, Jazz Fest is 7 days. So you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday of the first week. Then you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this was, day 6 of 7. So I'm there, and Brad and I are there, and I was like, hey, I'm going to go check it out because the Coors Edge, I liked it. It's also really low sugar, maybe none or close to no sugar, and like 41 calories, a very low calorie, non-alcoholic beer. And we had brought, for Jazz Fest, you're allowed to bring in water as long as it's sealed, like factory sealed water bottles. So we had brought in some and brought in some sparkling water and all that. But it was hot, and it was, very quickly, the drinks that we had in our backpack were also pretty warm. And so I was like, well, I would love something cold and refreshing. Let me go to the beer tent, and I'm going to go check out and try one of these. Coors Edge is the name of the beer. So I go to the beer tent, and I say, I'm standing in line. I'm like, hi, can I get a Coors Edge, please? And the lady's like, a what? I'm like, a Coors Edge. And she looks at the lady next to her. She said, a Coors what? And I'm like, a Coors Edge. Then the guy who's like behind them comes up and says, ma'am, we only have what's written on the menu board, sort of like a little condescending. And I said, it's on the menu board. It says Coors Edge right here. They're looking at each other, and then someone out in the back of the tent is like, oh, we have them back here. So they're iced down. They're like in the back on the side. So they're like climbing over the other, iced down other brands of beers to like get to it. They hand it up, and then they're like, here you go. I was like, okay, thanks. So a few hours later, I go back and we were kind of still in the same area. I go to the same tent, but I go to the other side of it. Like I'm in a different line. And I'm thinking that shows you how much people have been ordering a Coors Edge, at least at this tent here at Jazz Fest. And so I go to the other side. I'm standing in that line, and different people, because I was also maybe a little embarrassed. I was like a little self-conscious about it, which shouldn't be, but I felt that way a little bit because I felt like it seemed like such an odd thing to them. So I thought, I don't want to, if I cannot have that same interaction with those same people, I'll talk to somebody else. So I stand in the other line, which is also not good. I mean, we it doesn't feel good to feel that way. So I stand in the other line, and, I'll take a Coors Edge, and two ladies are there. One takes the money, then looks at the other lady, a what? And the other lady's like, and I say again, Coors Edge. Oh yeah, sure. So I'm like, okay, good. She comes back, she hands me a Coors Light. I was like, Coors Edge. So then again, the person yells from the back of the tent, they're over here. So all of that is to say, anything that is normalizing a drink that doesn't contain alcohol but still feels celebratory, I'm happy about it. So I want to preface it with this. This brand is a local brand that I'm really excited. It's these little individual cans of, zero proof cocktails. They brand them as mocktails. And a lot of the headlines, I will say, really focus on simply more the fact that these are craft type cocktails without the booze. And, one of the headlines specifically is the craft without the booze. Not making such deep claims about them being healthy, which I do appreciate. I think a lot of people make the assumption, though, that they're natural. They see that, it's lower alcohol or no alcohol, and they make the assumption that they're, quote, like healthier. And, we can arguably say that, yes, because they don't contain alcohol, this can be a better option to have. These can be a better option to have, throughout an event that you might otherwise be drinking, traditional cocktails. But the second ingredient after water is cane sugar. So it's fruit juice concentrates, some interesting flavors in here. I mean, ginger juice is in some of them, but there's water as the first ingredient. Second ingredient, cane sugar. So in these small cans, there's about 15 grams. One variety has 14 grams added sugar. That's 3 spoonfuls of added sugar in these small cans. Upper limit that we typically recommend is not more than about 20 grams of added sugar a day. And that still can be a lot for people. And so while they may only be 80 calories, it's 80 calories of largely added sugar. And what's interesting is, as I'm looking at the website, kind of seeing the commentary from the creators of this, they wanted the mocktails to have that depth of a craft cocktail, which I think is, again, missing. And anything that normalizes this, I love it. But they also included in there, we also wanted an option that was low on sugar, but these aren't. So I would love if brands like this, like I said, this also, that Bloody Mary seasoning, I think these brands are coming in with really good intention. The rice, I'm not so sure about. Seems like that might be more of I don't know. I'm not going to hypothesize there. I don't know. But I do think that, the craft cocktail that is no alcohol, local brand, the Bloody Mary mix, I do think these are coming in with these really good intentions. On the Bloody Mary mix, you know, an easy solution is to have that low sodium tomato juice. These other brands, though, you know, as more companies are coming out with drinks that are a non-alcoholic, fun way to still feel celebratory, and you know, there's all these things like Truly or Cat's Claw, like all these other kind of like non-alcoholic drinks that are something different. Like they're kind of, they're alcohol containing, like cocktails in a can. So having something like this is sort of like the non-alcoholic version to something like Truly or Cat's Claw or something like that. I would love if at least some of the options they had were low or no added sugar, so that we would be able to have something that's that convenient, portable. It's in a can. The labeling is just this brilliantly fun labeling. And it could also be zero proof, non-alcoholic, and low or no added sugars. So those are just, you know, just some things that might be catching our eye. Those are just 3 examples of things that have come across lately. Seeing headlines or seeing some just kind of hype about these. And then when we take that a little deeper look, what's actually happening in there, you know, and so you can extrapolate this to other areas. I mean, juice bars. We love like fresh pressed vegetable juice, and there's more and more juice bars popping up, and it makes it easy that if you're not going to, many people aren't going to take the time to juice themselves. So something like a juice bar makes it really easy. But how much of that is fruit juice versus, which is high in sugars, ounce for ounce, you know, fruit juice is about as high as a Sprite or a Coke in sugar. So how much of that is fruit juice versus fresh pressed vegetable juice? So again, kind of these health halos that exist. So just because it's a juice bar doesn't mean that all the things on the menu board might be the best fit for us nutritionally. So looking to see. And same thing would go for things like a gluten-free bakery or a vegan bakery. You know, just because they specialize in gluten-free options, you know, they may still have a lot of white refined flours and really high sugar. Same thing goes if it's a vegan bakery. So there's things that, you know, those juice bars can have a lot of really healthy options. Those gluten-free or vegan specialty bakeries can have a lot of really nutritious options that are made with almond flour, plant-based oils, low sugar, you know, plant-based sweeteners that are still low in sugar. So there can be a lot of really good options at these, but just being aware that just because it's that gluten-free bakery or vegan bakery or juice bar or the zero proof cocktail in a can that's, you know, or any of these things, just be aware that just that what hits us fast as that headline hype, we got to dig a little bit deeper. So let me know what you think. If there's others that have caught your eye, if you're like, okay, I'm so curious about this product, you know, my friends or my family, you know, whoever is like really just bought into this, but it's sort of got some red flags around it for you, send it my way. I would love to just see it, hear it. I love knowing about these things. And then I think that the more that these start to come onto the market, the more that we're asking, you know, hey, this is great that we have this product that is a non-alcoholic drink. Can you also make a version of this that is lower sugar? And the more that we're requesting these things, the more that the community says, hey, these are things that we would actually support, companies listen. And so they're already starting to listen. A lot of the corners have been turned as far as things that are being produced, and many of the steps are already in a much better direction. And so there's just some extra loops that could be even a notch better. And the more they hear it from us, you know, the more willing they are to put that time, that effort, that money into researching and developing these items. So if there's things that you see that you're like, hey, this is a red flag for me, send it my way. If there's other things that are just like kind of like drive you nuts when you see the marketing, share that with me. I always want to know what you think. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.